All right, here we go. Bob Lazar is the ex-government scientist who, in 1989, came forward with the fact that he had been part of a team of scientists who back-engineered extraterrestrial disks, flying saucers, in other words, at a base known as S4, some 15 miles south of the infamous Area 51 at Groom Lake. Bob's story is the main reason behind the state of Nevada changing the name of Nevada State Highway 375, the highway to Area 51, or S4, to its new name, the Extraterrestrial Highway. Indeed. Bob currently runs a company that manufactures and repairs alpha radiation detectors. He also creates CGI computer-generated graphics and simulations for technical and legal demonstration videos, for which he uses his mainframe supercomputer, which, by the way, is the second fastest computer in the state of Nevada, second only to the one at Nellis Air Force Base. Bob also has a small photo processing lab in his home. In his spare time, Bob does pyrotechnical and rocket research and throws Desert Blast, his annual fireworks blowout, at the Nevada desert. And if memory serves, he also fools around with alternative fuels for cars. Good morning, Bob. Are you there?
I'm here.
Bob, is it really true? It had to have been maybe 5 years ago that I interviewed you in concert with John Lear.
You know, I honestly don't remember that. My friends tell me I have about the worst memory that can be had, but from what I recall, years ago I remember John Lear apparently booking me on your show and never telling me about it.
Yeah, I remember that.
But I don't.
And then
I really don't remember ever doing the show.
No, there was a time, maybe even a couple of years before that, when we had you on for a short while.
I don't even remember that, but I'll take everyone's word for it.
All right. Well, in fact, we now have such a gigantic audience out there that hardly anybody knows who you are, Bob, except for, of course, you know, ufologists and so forth, who would be very familiar with your story. So the great majority of the audience, 99%, have no idea who Bob Lazar is. Now, I guess that means we have to begin at the beginning with regard to how you... Well, first of all, Bob, you're a physicist, correct?
Mm-hmm. Or was at the time.
Was at the time, yeah. How did you become involved with, or begin to get involved with, whatever it is out there at Area 51, or is specifically S4?
Well, let me try and give you the Reader's Digest version. Some years ago, I was working at Los Alamos National Labs in New Mexico. One particular day, I was going down to the lecture hall to hear Edward Teller speak, who, as most people know, is the father of the hydrogen bomb.
Yes. I
got down there a little early because I wanted to get in, assuming there was going to be a crowd of people, and actually, to my surprise, there was hardly anyone there. Coincidentally, that day, the local newspaper in town, the Monitor, had printed a front-page article on me. And right outside the lecture hall was Dr. Teller reading the front page of the paper. So I thought it was a perfect opportunity to introduce myself and just say hi.
Absolutely.
It was just a casual meeting, and the only reason I bring it up is years later I had moved out of Los Alamos after I quit working for the lab. I opened up my own business that did some contract work for the lab, and also started a one-hour photo shop for my wife that she ran there. We later moved out of Los Alamos to Las Vegas, and again, some time later, I decided, you know, I had missed working in the scientific community, so I decided to get back in and send out resumes. I sent them out really all over the place to the places where I'd essentially like to live a more, I really don't remember where else, but one of the other resumes I sent was to Dr. Teller's attention. Okay. And I had referenced our meeting back then. A short time later, I got a call from him, and he did remember me, to my surprise, and said we might have a position you're interested in. I said, great. Mm-hmm. I went down and was interviewed. At that time, there were a couple EG&G buildings by McCarran Airport out here.
I recall
in Las Vegas.
Yes.
I really don't know what's there now. Someone tells me there's still one building, but there used to be two before they expanded the airport, one of special projects, and I don't know what the other one was. But in either case, I was told to go down there for an interview. The interview was relatively short, and I really don't remember specifically what the job entailed, but they told me I was basically overqualified and would become bored with it in a short time. I said, fine, but they said, we might have something else in the future for you. I said, fine, okay, and basically went back home.
Figuring they had blown you off.
Right. I really don't remember what the job was, but it didn't really even sound too exciting to me, so it really didn't ring my bell at that point.
Do you recall anything about a technician level or something that would have been boring?
I really don't. Remember this, when I go through most of this stuff, people are amazed. Boy, how come you can't remember these facts? This is a fantastic point in your life, and but it's also a decade old now, and it's hard to remember specifics here and there. However, as it turned out, they did call back and had another position. The position was stated to be something that was involving a field propulsion system, which to me, in my mind, sounded something along the lines of some electromagnetic propulsion, something that might be used in space, maybe, I don't know, an ion drive system using mercury vapor or something like that. Or
You've always been fascinated by propulsion systems.
Anything with, exerts tremendous amount of energy, from, explosives to, high energy weapons, anything along those lines, propulsion. And and coincidentally, the article that Dr. Teller was reading was about a car that I had converted to run on a jet engine.
Now, you see, I remembered that. And then you converted another one, I believe, to run on hydrogen, didn't you?
Yeah, actually, I'm really surprised that you remember that. I don't remember.
I have a good...
That is one of the number one things I get asked about.
I know. I have a good memory, Bob. For some,
I'm
for
envious
some
of that. But in either case, I after a more or less lengthy interview, I accepted the job, and of course I had to go back a second time.
Can you remember any of the details of this rather lengthy interview? I mean, was a lot of it security-oriented?
Well, there was certainly a lot of security-oriented questions and so forth later on. However, keep in mind that I had just come from Los Alamos just a couple of years before.
That's true.
Where I had Q clearance, civilian, top secret clearance.
Mm-hmm.
They really didn't have to go and dig deep back into my past to see if I was, of Russian descent or anything along those lines. So, basically, the job just seemed like a typical research and development job. I was anxious to get started on it, and things went on. All they told me is that it was in a remote area out in the desert, and that I would fly out there maybe once, possibly twice a week, just to kind of get caught up on stuff, and they had to reinstate my clearance, which would take, perhaps a couple weeks, maybe a month at the latest.
Sure.
And so in the meantime, I was given essentially busy work to do, or at least that's how it rang in my mind. And this is typical, too, at Los Alamos. If you're initially hired there before your clearance goes through, sometimes, obtaining Q clearance can take up to 13 months. So they don't just have you sit at home. You'll, before you go to work for the lab, sit around and work on alarm systems or something like that. Doesn't, something usually below your potential, but something to keep you busy.
That rings true. I was in the Air Force. They did that to us all the time.
Yeah, it's pretty common. So I thought, well, that's very typical. I had no idea what this would actually entail until I got into it, and obviously looking through their eyes, I guess it made sense that they couldn't, of course, divulge what this job would actually entail before they had, gone through all the security and whatnot. But that's essentially how the job came about.
All right. One thing that I would think you would remember is your impressions of Mr. Teller.
I do. As far as what?
Well, what kind of guy was he? Just simple questions. What kind of guy was he?
He was, he seems to have two faces, which is strange. In talking to him one-on-one, he's a very polite, pleasant, intelligent man. However, virtually any interview you'll see of this guy, he comes across as the most pompous, mean person you have ever run into in your life.
Pompous and mean.
I don't know how else to describe him, but he was not nearly as short, not physically speaking, but I mean, if you see him in interviews, you'll see him answer questions specifically to the point, short, and on to the next question, and not be very talkative, not offer any information, other than what you're immediately talking about, and in person he was certainly not that way. So he was, the exact opposite, very pleasant and willing to talk about anything. Of course, we didn't talk about nuclear weapons or anything.
Well, that's what I was going to ask about. Last night I interviewed Professor Michio Kaku.
Never heard of him.
A very preeminent physicist back at New York University, and he, too, has worked with Professor Teller. And I asked Professor Kaku why he had not participated in the hydrogen bomb development, and he said he simply chose not to. He wanted to go into a different direction with physics, and had quite a bit to say about Edward Teller. And apparently he was consumed during the Cold War years with national security, with being concerned about national security and...
This is Dr. Teller you're talking about.
Yes, and developing bombs. And, in fact, even today, the programs go on, I guess, with the third generation of hydrogen bombs, sort of designer bombs, Professor Kaku said. And, all right, Bob, so you got the job. You landed the job, and they had you doing busy work, and then what?
Well, not busy work hadn't started.
Oh.
That's what I thought was going to happen. Instead, where did we leave off?
Well, actually, with busy work, they were kind of...
Well, that's, yeah, essentially. I guess essentially it was to get caught up with what was going on. And really, to my surprise, the security was a little more than oppressive. Generally you're just assigned a badge and shown the general procedures and things of that sort. This was a little different.
Are you still talking about the facility near Las Vegas, or are you talking about being flown up there now?
No, this is when finally I was flown.
Okay.
I go to McCarran Airport right by the EG&G building, and
right.
I'd be flown to Groom Lake. As I landed there the first time, right across from where the plane parked, there's a security office, or was a security office. And that's, I believe I spent quite a while there, but, reviewing, how secure things are, so on and so forth. But, this is not where I worked. Where I did work was about, from my estimates, about 10 or 15 miles south of there. We were taken there in a converted school bus, those big Bluebird jobs. It was painted kind of a dark navy blue.
There's a lot of people, Bob, who don't even believe that Area 51 exists, by the way, much less S4. I live out here in Pahrump. Bob,
Well, I think, people...
I can tell you...
People don't believe Area 51 exists?
Well, there are a lot of people who don't. But I can tell you, Bob, when you drive up by the VFW here in Pahrump at about 4:30 or 5 in the morning, there's a whole bunch of buses out there, and they've got signs right on the side of the buses. I saw it about a month ago, and it just says Area 51.
Oh, really?
Yeah, oh, yeah.
Well, they're not bothering anymore to keep that secret.
I guess. Anyway, so then they take you from Groom Lake, the main facility, and incidentally, Bob, up on my website, I've got a picture, a pretty good one, the best one I've ever seen, of the Groom Lake facility, and it shows what appears to be 3 large hangars, with the one in the center perhaps being the largest. Is that your recollection?
3 large hangars.
Yeah, 3 big hangars. There are a lot of other attendant buildings, but 3 rather large hangars.
I don't recall there being 3, obviously large hangars on the approach in from Las Vegas, that stood out that much above everything else.
Okay.
I recall a huge satellite dish, but for the most part, most of the time I was going there at night and certainly didn't have a run of the place. All I did was get to go in. One time I got to go to the cafeteria, but other than that, it was merely a stop.
Toward S4.
Yeah, toward S4, but, I don't recall there being 3 large hangars, really, that stood out more than anything else.
Did you ever see anything unusual at all at Groom Lake?
The thing I did see that was unusual was some sort of advanced rocket or jet plane. People have called it Aurora. I don't know if it was Aurora or if it even exists. But John Andrews from the Tester Corporation and a few other aviation buffs kind of interviewed me more or less about that. It was something along the lines of an X-15 shaped type of craft. Now, we were driving away from this as it was taxiing, but it was a horrendously loud tearing sound that the engines made. And I think my original description was that it made a sound like the air was tearing, and that's the best description I could give to it. Now, I certainly have heard about the new generation of scramjet engines that have supersonic airflow inside that burn liquid methane and so on and so forth. Whether that was these, I don't know. But I did get a look up the exhaust as we were turning, and it was they were rectangular exhaust with some sort of vanes inside. That's all the information I can give, and what it was, I don't know. But that was the strangest thing I ever saw.
Do you recall the general shape of the aircraft? Was it close to what we would call a lifting body?
No, well, even though the X-15 was a lifting body, it was not a lifting body like you'd see on an F-16 or something, where there'd be a lot more wing incorporated into the body. It was more along the lines of a long, slender body, maybe a cross between an F-104 and an X-15 for those people that are familiar with those planes. Very short, stubby wings, which translates to me, high speed of rotation, high flight speed, and things like that. But again, I didn't get a very good look at it, and I don't know. It could have been anything, a scientific research vehicle or anything. I'm certainly not claiming that was Aurora. But sometime later, some of those people were down in Rachel, and they heard and recorded a sound that they interpreted as the sky tearing and played it back to me, and it was, in fact, the identical sound. So a couple of years later, it was still operational, whatever that thing was. But that was the only unusual thing I ever saw there.
All right, so you landed, and they generally then, you would, I guess, get off on the tarmac there and get right on a bus?
Yeah. Well, straight across from where the plane parked, head end, straight across from there in kind of a large parking area was the security building, and that's where we picked up the bus and went south. The first time I did go in, and it was an extensive little get-together with the security people there, and signed all kinds of strange forms that...
Were there a lot of people on the bus?
No, not going down to S4. Generally, the person that accompanied me all the time was Dennis Mariani, who was my supervisor at that time.
Okay. And so then they had you sign all kinds of forms. What kind of forms?
Well, everything from virtually signing away my constitutional rights. So should anything go wrong as far as me spilling my guts,
spilling your guts, yep.
They would, essentially be judge, jury, and executioner. As far as the authorization to attain the clearance there, that was an order that was signed by President Reagan, which I saw on the desk. I'm trying to remember some of the other paperwork. Beforehand, I gave permission to have my phone lines monitored.
Boy. And can you remember any of the wording? I mean, you said you signed something that would allow them, if you blabbed, to be judge, jury, and
well, I had signed something like that. I mean, that may be a slight exaggeration of how the wording was, but certainly I signed, I'm trying to remember what it was, like a 10-10 agreement. If you've heard that before, I don't remember the exact title of the document, but, it says if you violate, national security secrets, it's 10 years in jail and a $10,000 fine. Does that sound familiar to you?
It does.
That before.
It does.
I've signed something like that before, but this was certainly far above and beyond that, which was kind of shocking, actually. But at the time, you pretty much just blow it off and say all this means is that I'm going to be involved in something, extremely interesting, and
sure.
It's great. So what? I have no intention of violating any rules or causing any problems. So there's no sweat.
No, I understand. I mean, by that time, you're probably tantalized, thinking this.
Oh, really? I was, it's certainly pumped up.
It's going to be real fun.
Exactly.
All right. So you sign all the forms, including one to tap your phone, huh?
Right. They did. That was again before I went down there. That was down at EG&G, and I gave them permission to do that. But that was only for a limited amount of time. I don't recall how long that was for. And Bob, to me, that's kind of a silly thing to do in the first place, because if you're going to monitor my phone, why tell me? It kind of defeats the purpose.
Maybe because otherwise they have to go through some sort of legal procedure and get some sort of court something or another. So
yeah, but you would think in the interest of national security they could circumvent all that, but...
well, they probably do, actually.
Who knows?
When they need to.
I had actually doubted that they were actually doing that. Once in a while everyone hears little clicks and pops and buzzes on their phone, and, I really didn't think that was it. And,
my view is a good tap is one you never hear.
Well, this is my point exactly. Sometime later, I guess we'll get into that, but when things turned sour, actually before they did, they had come to my house 30 minutes after I got off the phone with Gene one day, and we were joking around on the phone. They came to my front door 30 minutes later with a transcript of our conversation and outlined were the questionable phrases that I had spoken. Now, this is amazing to me, considering the closest FBI building down here is on Charleston and
Maryland
3rd or Charleston and Maryland Parkway. But, I mean, that's an amazing feat. It almost makes me think they had a little mobile setup somewhere.
Well, it is. You're a computer guy, and I've heard, maybe you could confirm this for me, that the NSC has the ability to have supercomputers which virtually are monitoring perhaps even millions of conversations, looking not at the entire conversation, but listening for key words.
Well, that's how they caught that drug kingpin down in, where was it, Panama or Mexico?
That's right, and that was cellular.
They scanned every single phone line,
right,
and just picked out certain words and grabbed them.
So I encourage my audience to constantly, in the middle of a conversation, just simply say, kilo, kilo. All right. Well, Anyway, so onward to Area S4. I guess is it a paved road or a bumpy little ride?
That's quite a bumpy little ride. It's a dirt road down there, follows along the base of the mountain, and coming up to the facility, it's right off of Papoose Dry Lake Bed.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a small mountain range on the side, and built right into the side of the mountain is the installation itself, the S4 installation, and it's composed of hangar doors around one side, and then I believe on the on the south-facing side, there's is the main entrance into the facility.
Were the windows on the bus darkened, or could you see out as you went?
No, you could. The only place you could see out was the front. On the bus, most of the times I had gone down there was the driver, a security guard, and Dennis Mariani. The security guard almost always stood right up front, not sitting down, but holding that bar, which is right by the door on those buses.
Sure.
I don't know if it was in an effort to block my view out there or just to intimidate me and stare at me. But that's how he rode the entire trip down there. So it was always difficult to see exactly where we were and
what was in between.
Right. Well, there's really nothing in between. It's pretty much desert.
Dennis Mariani, who was he?
He was my supervisor. What his exact position was pretty much unclear to me. He's a stocky guy, smokes a cigar, kind of looks very military-looking, short blonde hair. It's about the best I could describe him. Maybe, late 30s, early 40s.
Not gregarious, more security-like?
Yes. So I really don't know what his exact function was in the world.
But you can kind of tell military guys.
Yeah, just by the way they look.
And the way they comport themselves and so forth and so on.
But, again, this is my guesstimation of what this guy was about.
Was he your constant shadow? Was he with you all the time?
For the most part, until I learned how things operated there. I guess I shouldn't jump ahead that far yet. Well, I might as well. For the most part, for science to progress anywhere, if you're doing any sort of research whatsoever, one of the things that is vital is free discussion, open and free discussion amongst the people that are working on the project.
Okay, right.
Well, obviously, it's how ideas are bounced off other people, and
that was
the only way things can progress.
Wasn't that one of the main contentious points during the development of the atomic bomb in the Manhattan Project? Everything was compartmentalized, and
the military just loves to do that.
And the scientists just hate it because they want to bounce ideas off each other.
Exactly.
So you're saying, really, in 1989, that was still going on?
Well, probably. Well, I don't know. How would I know how bad it was during the atomic age? But it was very oppressive. So much so that our job was very compartmentalized. Every aspect was split into groups of people. Groups of people are quite literally two people. You work on the buddy system. In other words, the only person I can talk to, the only person I can discuss anything with, the only person I can relate to is the one person who I work with. Any other aspect of the project, any other questions are simply not to be asked. So immediately you're interfering with your progress in that if whatever you're doing interacts with anything else anywhere, you've run into a block wall.
You don't even really know if you're the first person to come down and be assigned this task, do you?
Exactly.
There
in fact,
could have
I
been
was
others.
told that I wasn't.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But, you really have no idea what's going on. And I'm sure if you found that, Part A connects to Part B, which we're not allowed to see, I'm sure there would be some way to gain some of that information. But,
Bob, not only were you not the first person assigned that task, but this might be an interesting point to tell them why you were told you were hired.
No, that's true. I was actually, one of the questions I've always had is, why did they hire me? Certainly for this project, I would not be the most intelligent, the most resourceful person that they could possibly hire out of all the people at Los Alamos or anywhere else in the world for that matter. So I've always wondered exactly why they would have picked me.
And so why then did they?
I still don't know. I have always wondered this. I've ran a lot of things through my mind, different possible scenarios, and they really, none of them make any sense. Was it because Edward Teller just thought I was a nice guy and essentially juiced me into the position?
It sounds,
yeah,
it sounds that way.
Yeah, but in a project like this, why would something like that happen where every person counts? You're talking in a project where there are only actually 22 active people working on it.
Yeah, but when Teller speaks, the military listens.
Yeah, that's true. But, I mean, I didn't know him well enough. As far as my scientific background, it was actually fairly limited. I was working at Los Alamos on working with the accelerator at that point, so it really wasn't a propulsion-based job, anything to do with, what I was about to have my hands on.
Maybe they assumed you did have the right background. Maybe they didn't really know what they had on their hands.
Well, one of the...
I tell you, we're coming up on a break, and we'll pick up on this point when we get back. Everybody relax. It'll be a good one. And the story continues. Here we are at Area S4 south of Groom Lake, and I guess by now you're in great anticipation, Bob, wondering what you're going to be doing.
I was just about to make a point before we broke, and I can't remember it.
And that makes sense. In other words, if they had something they didn't understand, I can imagine they would bring in an array of people of different disciplines to take a look-see.
Well, that might have been the case, but to this day I can't figure out why. If certainly you look at my record and the way I approached things and the work I had done before was a little more renegade, and maybe that's what they were doing. Was looking for someone that would approach a project from a different road. And
are you able to talk about what you did at Los Alamos?
I did several things. Initially, I was working on the polarized proton target on the accelerator. The accelerator there at Los Alamos is a linear accelerator. It stretches about, if I remember, about a half mile, and it's one of the more unique setups in that instead of running a single experiment on the output of the accelerator, the beam is split into different areas. And all these different areas are, I don't know really if they're leased or rented to other countries or other scientists, but several other people and other groups from all over the world essentially can conduct experiments simultaneously. At different times they'll fire different particles down the target for different lengths of time, and everyone can run their own experiments and see what's going on. There was also some Star Wars development done there.
Okay. I'm sitting here listening, trying to imagine any application for what you were about to do, and you don't. At
S4.
Yeah.
There's none. There was no direct connection at all. This is one of the things that has perplexed me forever. But maybe this was the point that I was going to make. In fact, it is. It just popped back in my mind. What was strange about the interviews I had was, certainly there was some technical questions here and there. They essentially knew my background already. But what they were most concerned was what I had done in my spare time, which I found to be very unusual.
Now, what had you done in your spare time? You had worked with propulsion systems in your spare time, right?
Right. I mean, they were essentially concerned with more of my, for lack of a better word, playtime than they were with what I was or what I had currently done.
All right, well, let's take this back to Edward Teller. When you had a conversation with Edward Teller, did you talk about your playtime? Did you talk about...
Well, I was talking about at that time the static ramjet engine that was, in fact, that was in the front of the paper. So we were talking about, in fact, at that time I had filed patents on it, of how the device operated without the need for fuel pumps and things of that sort because of the type of fuel it used.
What is a static ramjet engine?
It was an offshoot of a pressure jet engine, which was invented by Eugene Gluharf, who was also coincidentally the inventor of the rocket ejection seat that's used on all fighter aircraft.
Indeed.
He developed that, I believe, in the 50s, and in the 70s I had run into him, and really, as a kid back then, started working in my spare time as I went to Pierce College at that time, working to improve on the design. I came off with an offshoot of the design, which was a little more complicated, but produced a lot more thrust. The basic design of the engine is it has no moving parts at all. One property of propane is that it sticks to hot metal. Mm-hmm. This eliminates all the needs for flame holders and things of that sort inside the engine, which makes it more complicated. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to think of a couple other points about it. It was a pretty different design as far as jet engines go. And with the changes I made, it was essentially a different type of engine. And after I had gone past the development of it on a test stand, I built a slightly larger one and installed it in the back of a car. And it was a convenient mobile test setup as opposed, well, and additionally, it was something kind of interesting to play around with in the desert.
Sure.
Which is where the whole article came from in the newspaper. But
all right, well, then I think you've answered your own question.
But someone playing around with jet engines really doesn't qualify him or her to work on something of extraterrestrial origin.
No, but then again, who does have qualifications to go work on something?
Well, there's a point.
So I can understand, and here's how I would, based on what you said, I'll bet here's what happened. The article in the paper, the conversation with Edward Teller, and probably his suggestion, which probably amounts to more of an order, that you'd be a good person, kind of a rebel, to go take a look at the stuff they had at Area S4. That would be my best guess. That's a pretty good guess. Well, yeah, if you're going to go, if you really have extraterrestrial craft and you're trying to figure out what makes them go, then you're going to go find somebody who works out of the box. In other words, is a bit of a rebel and kind of works out of the normal box and experiments and tinkers and is interested in propulsion. That's the kind of person you're going to go for, because there's nobody out there with specific qualifications for that job.
Yeah, that they were also very concerned with.
Your psychological profile.
Yeah, they were concerned with how I handle stress. In fact, I remember one of the questions was, have you ever thrown tools around in the lab or anything to that effect? And I thought these were very strange questions for what we were talking about. But well, in either case, I got the job and wound up there. But
haven't you ever thrown tools?
No, actually, I haven't.
I have. I've kicked radios, too. One all the way across the room, put my foot through it. Anyway, so then you seem qualified in most every way, as much as one could be qualified for that. So here you come to S4, and were you immediately led into this area where these craft were?
No, absolutely not. In fact, the first day there, I went in, and I think my first stop was to go to the medical office there. I believe there was a nurse in there. I'm pretty sure that was my first stop, and I had to go through a series of what I was told were allergen tests.
Allergen tests?
Yeah. They took my arm and drew a little graph on it and pricked each little area in my arm with different little needles.
No kidding.
And, in fact, I was not permitted back to work, I think, for 2 weeks until there was a reaction, or if there was to be a reaction, with any of the substances they put on my skin. And they said, we're working with some extremely exotic materials here that we're not all that familiar with, and we want to know if there's going to be any problem with it. And I said, well, that's, again, odd, but acceptable. And I was also given an injection there, too, which was a wide spectrum, what did they call it?
Antibiotic?
No, it wasn't a wide spectrum antibiotic. It was a wide spectrum something or other.
It's always good to know what they're shooting you with.
Yeah. I thought, there have been so many, I'm sure, which we'll get into later, so many ridiculous stories, offshoots of what actually had happened to me. People said, oh, well, they injected you with Thorazine or so on, or this was the memory drug that wiped out your memory so you could only remember back and forth, and, so on and so forth. But I'm pretty sure that wasn't the case. This was, they were mainly concerned about the, here you're dealing with actual extraterrestrial materials. And if we're going to be crawling around on them, taking things apart and having contact with them, they imagine they want to make sure that the people working on it are fairly safe. Well, that, in one hand, weighed against the fact that, don't forget, the United States government fed fallout to people from time to time.
You bet.
And, did other strange things to them. But
when you originally told your story, Bob, years ago, that wasn't known. Hazel O'Leary was not around yet, and everybody regarded your story as absolutely incredible, beyond belief. But then when Hazel O'Leary stepped out and said the following occurred, everybody went into kind of a stupor and said, my God, we did that? So your story isn't so out of line.
Well, a lot has actually changed in the past 10 years. If you remember, 10 years ago, too, the predominant theory about how gravity propagates in any physics textbook, related to gravitons. Mm-hmm. And now the predominant theory is gravitational waves, which is exactly how some of, and some scientists and physicists of that time, pointed out one of the many reasons they say the reason this story can't be true was that this was absolutely ridiculous, so on and so forth. And now it's spoken of as a matter of fact. This is how gravity propagates through space. And it's just interesting to see how things slowly, over the span of a decade, quietly change.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one thing I do keep an eye on.
Yes.
But
and I take it your arm didn't break out inappropriately, so you passed.
No, I think it did develop a small eruption somewhere, but it was nothing to be concerned about, or so I was told. So we just proceeded from there.
As you know, there is a group of people suing the government over illnesses they have suffered from work they did at Area 51, and that is proceeding quietly in court. It's not going to be so quiet when it goes to trial, but that's underway now. So, indeed, there are some pretty exotic materials up there.
Actually, you just reminded me of something. When was that, Gene? When, was it right after that where I collapsed from the kidney?
Oh,
shot.
It's kind of surprising. I forget. Yeah, so there was an adverse reaction to something.
Do you think that was, well, of course you have no way of knowing whether it was the allergy test they put you through or the shot they gave you?
Or wasn't it an amazing coincidence,
Well, I take it you went to the doctor.
I did, yeah.
What did he say?
I don't remember. I think he said, he gave me a shot of painkiller, Demerol, I believe it was, and he took a urine sample, a blood test, and he asked if I had any previous problems, anything strange, and obviously I said no. Certainly didn't mention anything about getting an injection
right.
in a strange place in the middle of the desert.
Right.
didn't they do X-rays or a CAT scan or something and
No,
find
not a CAT scan. They did
kidney stone?
they did just an X-ray to see if there was any blockage. But
There was
a
nothing.
day later, or I think even the next morning, everything was fine. The X-rays came back negative, and I believe the blood work came back negative too, as did the urine sample. So, in fact, I think his conclusion was that perhaps I had passed a small stone, and wound up in my bladder, and then it would probably hurt coming out again. But that never occurred, and whether or not that scenario is correct, again, is just speculation. But I don't know, that you just stirred that up in my memory. I don't think I've even mentioned that since it.
That's right. That's how little bits and pieces come back. How's your health now, by the way, and since then? Okay.
Oh, fine, no problem.
All right. So anyway, you pass all their little tests.
Past all that, the next thing to happen was that I was led into a room with quite a number of little briefing packages, briefing papers, or these range from 2 pages to about 5 pages, little folders with different aspects of the project that I was working on. This was, I believe, the part of the first day and the second day that I was working there.
So they just sat you down at a table and had you begin to read about...
Yeah, what these were just basic overviews of what each group was doing, just essentially to give you knowledge of what the other facets of the project were about.
A general overall knowledge.
Right, had no specifics whatsoever,
Figures.
but if for instance, there was a group with metallurgy, so on and so forth.
All right.
And also contained some of the names of the projects.
Oh, it did?
Yeah.
All right. Back to Bob Lazar and Gene Huff. Gentlemen, you're back on the air again. All right. So here we are. You're in a little room with a bunch of briefing papers giving you more or less an outline, but not specifics of the work being done on. Actually, at that point, did they state what it was that was being worked on?
Well, at this point, yeah. This is the first time I really knew exactly what I would be doing. And this is where it was stated that the project was essentially that of back engineering an extraterrestrial craft.
That must be quite a line to read.
Well, it was, and it was also hard to believe, because certainly going into the project, I was basically a nuts and bolts guy, and certainly didn't believe in UFOs and thought everyone was crazy that even considered the topic. I certainly believe that there was life elsewhere. Certainly life can exist on other planets, other galaxies, other solar systems, but I just found it very hard to believe that there was any intelligent life visiting Earth. And
you had never had any close encounter of the third kind?
No, and I thought people were basically crackpots.
It really is true. People don't believe this about you, Bob. They think you are the guru of ufology. And
boy, have you got the wrong guy.
Yeah, and it just isn't true.
No, please.
You see, I remember the interview I did with you before. I remember it very well. Anyway, so here you are reading about all of this, and you get sort of an overview of it all, and probably what are you thinking by then? I mean, is your mouth hanging open? Extraterrestrial?
It is to some extent, and another part of me is beginning to wonder whether or not this is true at all, or if this is some
sort of
psychological test.
Mm-hmm.
Everything else was so way out, essentially. Maybe this is, another game that we're playing.
Maybe they're just trying to determine what reactions of people in science would be to extraterrestrial craft or the fact of extraterrestrial presence of any kind at all.
Right, and certainly all these thoughts had gone through my mind. From there, the days have kind of blended together in my mind. It's hard to separate what happened on each day after that, but I believe that the next time I went there was the time that I was actually let in through one of the hangar doors. Now, normally we drove alongside of the installation and came in the main entrance.
Mm-hmm.
This one time, we drove up and one of the hangar doors was open.
Uh-huh.
In the hangar doors, as plain as day, or in the hangar door, as plain as day, was the craft that I had later labeled the sport model. A very sleek-looking, very stereotypical flying saucer. My immediate reaction was, this is the new generation fighter that we're working on. For whatever reason, it's saucer-shaped, but immediately in my mind, I said, this explains all the UFO sightings throughout history. It's just been the development of this thing.
Here it is.
Right, here it is. This makes perfect sense.
I've got a model 5 feet away from me here, a tester model, which I believe the Tester Corporation built based on your description.
Right. It looked exactly like that.
Is that what we're talking about, the
Exactly.
sport model you call the sport model?
Yeah, very sleek, sporty looking. Yeah, that's it exactly.
I'll be damned. All right. So you drove by this thing.
We actually stopped in front.
In front.
I was led out of the bus, the security guard first, then Dennis and myself. Dennis walked on ahead of me, and the security guard told me to keep my eyes forward and just follow Dennis into the back. And at the back of the hangar, there was a door that led into a hallway in the office areas. I walked right by the craft. The door was off the craft, or hatch, whatever you want to call it. Right alongside of it was an American flag adhered to it. A little sticker, not
really
a flag. Now, all that did was cement it in my mind, thinking, well, this is, obviously this is it. I slid my hand along the side of the craft, which the guard didn't appreciate, and I was told, again, keep my hands at my side.
What did it feel like?
Walk forward. I say it felt like metal, and the reason I say that is because it was cool to the touch.
Mm-hmm.
So, yes.
It could
it have
metal
been an advanced ceramic
Sure.
or something? Absolutely. But to me,
Sure.
it felt and it appeared like metal. We continued in, and this is where I first met the person that I'd be working with, Barry Castillo or Castile, however you pronounce that. And this is when I first saw the initial components of the craft that had been taken out.
So they had begun to gut this thing then?
Not this particular one. There was more than one there.
How many?
There were actually 9 craft, not all like this, but from what they told me, from what I saw, there were 9 craft, and don't ask me where they came from or how we got them or anything. I have no idea. Mm-hmm. But the craft were in different, really different states. Some were completely dismantled. Some looked as if they would be operational, that they hadn't been touched at all. But apparently, from what I understand, all the crafts had the exact same reactor and propulsion system in them.
Did any of the craft look as though they had been in a collision or crash?
No. The only one that had damage to it looked intentional. It was a craft that had it's kind of hard to describe, but the area around the craft, the lip, if you will, was very broad and flat and thin, and it looked as if it had been stood up and a projectile fired through it. The hole from the distance that I saw, it looked around 4 inches, but it could have been at any size. It looked as if the metal was bent outward, and now that could have been dropped from the sky. Someone could have fired a projectile through it. Who knows? Again,
well,
this is just
that
speculation
alone
on
is
my
very
part.
interesting. In other words, we're not dealing with Superman's cape here. Holes could be blown through it.
Right. Of course, on the other hand, it's an extremely unscientific test. You take something as prized as that, you don't stand it up and fire a cannon at the thing or a howitzer. You certainly, take a small quantity off and, do your analysis of that piece. But for whatever reason, that was the only one that looked like it sustained any damage. Some of the other craft were dismantled to some point, but certainly not wrecked. The only craft that I was permitted to work on, to touch, to have anything to do with, was the craft that I termed the sport model. That's the one that you have a model of there.
Well, as you turn around, as you walk in on all of this, though, Bob,
No, I did not see this all at one time. I saw this one craft. Now, the hangar doors are all next to each other, and only at one time, way down the road, were all the bay doors open at one time, and I got a glance to see in what was in the other hangar doors. But for the most part, at this point, all I knew was that there was this one craft, and now in my mind, I am convinced that this is just a U.S. manufactured, extremely secret,
craft.
Fighter reconnaissance craft, who knows what. But
and the little American flag did that for you?
Oh, without question, that was it. It's a done deal.
So
that's
what do you say? You look at it and say, turn around to your companion, we'll call him, and say, wow, or my God, or where did these come from?
No, nothing. I just had a smile on my face, if I remember, walked into the back door, and then, the introductions began. The only other person I really interfaced with was Rene. I don't remember his last name, and I actually can't remember what in the world Rene did, but for the most part, Barry and I worked closely together. Now, this is also the first time that my supervisor left me alone with Barry, and, this is where the learning process essentially began.
This
is where my view of everything changed.
Did they tell you at that point what your specific job was? In other words, there it is, and it's sort of like, okay, what am I supposed to do?
Well, that's what this, that's where we begin now. This is exactly what this meeting with Barry entails, is the description of precisely what I'm supposed to be working on, what my function in life is now at this place. And this is where I find out that we are essentially, well, number one, that the briefings I was reading are correct.
In other words, they are extraterrestrial.
Right. These craft are not extraterrestrial. The scope, the aim of our project is now to back engineer these craft, or this one particular craft, with the intention of duplicating it, or duplicating the subsystems within it using earthly materials. So that was the project. Now, this hit me quite hard at that time, and needless to say, now, this night I didn't get any sleep. It was fairly exciting before that, but and certainly Barry just telling me this wasn't enough. This is when we also had some demonstrations on what we had found out, or what information had been gleaned so far from the technology that we've seen. It was all very fantastic, and it was absolutely mind-boggling.
Well, I know you don't follow all this, but I have to ask, have you seen Independence Day?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Oh, okay, good. At least you've done that.
Well, they invited me to the premiere of that.
Oh, they did?
Yeah. In fact, they made me stand up for some reason.
They made you?
Yeah, and they introduced me.
I see.
But, in fact, someone called, I don't remember the people involved there, but when they were talking about the movie, the making of the movie, so on and so forth, the lab technician there, I don't remember his name in the movie, but who wore the white lab coat, they called the Bob Lazar guy. I don't remember the other people that were there, but I thought that was pretty funny. But as they said, they had taken for the movie, they had taken much of the UFO lore stories and everything that had been circulating around for years, and threw together the script in a short time and produced it. So that wasn't. It looked nothing like that, by the way, but the idea was the same.
Same idea. All right. Well, we're at an interesting juncture here, and the real fun is about to begin. Were you told that you were going to be working on one specific area of back engineering, or were you going
Only?
Really, only.
Power and propulsion system, and everything else was essentially off limits.
Meaning you couldn't even touch it?
No, I couldn't touch it. However, I did get to go on the craft one time, and this was for the express purpose of only seeing the placement of the reactor and how the gravity amplifiers worked, how the emitters moved freely underneath on the primary level, and just how all the subcomponents fit together.
All right. That's a good place to hold it. We're at the top of the hour. It's kind of interesting when you listen to people like Stan and you listen to people like Bob, as far as we've gone with the story, it's all laid out in such a calm, matter-of-fact way that I think a lot of the public has a tendency to lose sight of the implications of what they're hearing. But you've told the story so many times, Bob, that I guess it comes out that way, sort of in a matter-of-fact way, huh?
Yeah, it pretty much does.
All right. Let us return to your story. Now you've had a chance to get in the craft, and what are you doing? What are you working on? What are you seeing?
Well, if I remember, I have just met with Barry, and we're now going over things. Let's see. Well, this is, as I said, when I first realized exactly what was going on, what the implications were, and precisely what I'd be doing. In the room, this is a lab off the main hallway, okay. And in the room is one of the reactors from one of the crafts and one of the amplifiers from one of the crafts also.
How big are these?
The reactor, I would imagine, is about 2 feet, somewhere around 18 inches, 2 feet, somewhere in that general area.
Not really big then?
No, not large at all. Odd-looking thing. Has a bottom plate and then half of a sphere on top of it. The amplifier itself is about 2 feet in diameter, probably 4 feet long, cylindrical shaped, with something that would look like plates on the outside of it, black in color. These are very unusual, and essentially hollow, very, very unusual looking devices. This isn't actually the amplifier that I always catch myself calling it that. It's the emitter. It's the device that is moved on a pivot, and it's where the gravity wave actually is or emanates from. Quite similar to a horn on a microwave system. As it turns out, gravity waves behave a lot more like microwaves. At least the gravity waves that are being produced by this system do. So you have waveguides and things of that sort that you'd see in a microwave system. Those are the main components of the craft that were in the lab at that time.
What does that suggest or tell us about the nature of gravity?
Well, actually, you have to look and see what we really know about gravity. And, we really, as it turns out, don't know anything about gravity. As people have said, we can certainly measure its forces or measure its effect on things.
Right.
But really, to this date, there is no, and a lot of people don't know this, that there's truly no conclusive evidence at the present time that gravitational waves have ever been detected in a laboratory. Now, there have been several gravitational wave detectors built, and you can assume that they're detecting gravitational waves, but they can also be detecting many other energies or fluxes of energies from who knows where. So it's something we can hardly measure, something we certainly know the existence of, but we know very, very little about it. It's essentially a big hole, a black hole, if you will, in physics as we know it.
Actually, the physicists that I've talked to are not altogether certain whether it's a push or a pull, and
I think are pretty sure it's a pull, but in physics today, physics itself is so fluid, yet so many people, either true physicists or armchair physicists or, scientists, whoever you run into, really stand their ground on theories, yet, most people tend to forget that these are just theories. They are not, these are not facts. This is a topic we know very, very little about, and as I said some time ago, the prominent theory was that there are gravitons, alleged subatomic particles that actually, accounted for the force of gravity. However, people that do bring that up really don't know much about that theory either, because there was never an actual particle called a graviton. The whole concept behind a graviton was that because I'm trying to think of how to put this in layman's terms. They basically wanted to quantify gravity. Maybe I shouldn't get into this yet.
All right, you're looking at this thing. When you see it, do you know what it is?
What are we talking about?
Well,
I've already lost myself.
Okay.
We're looking at the amplifier itself?
That's right. That's right.
Okay. Well, we'll save this technical discussion for later then. No, basically, I have no idea what I'm looking at.
Okay.
I had to be led through everything. The first demonstration that was presented to me was the actual operation of the reactor. Now, this in itself is nothing short of a miracle. We're dealing with something extremely small, maybe 2 foot square, maybe 6 inches high, just on outside dimensions. And the power output of something like this is equivalent to a little nuclear power plant. I mean, it's very impressive. Also, the fact that it's not producing any waste heat, which is a violation of the laws of thermodynamics.
You bet.
The amount of power coming out of essentially a very small place.
What did the demonstration actually entail? I mean, what did you
first
see?
was certainly not the electrical output of it, but it was showing me the gravitational field around the device. Now, the only reason I started going off on a tangent about gravity is because I guess my whole point was that we don't have a machine. There is nothing in existence that can make gravity. I've seen a lot of people, just lay people, telling me stories about how they'll watch a film on NASA and how the astronauts are training and they're in a little chamber and they're floating around and they're, in a weightless environment. They don't realize it's an airplane doing a crash dive. That there is no machine that makes gravity. I mean, at all. Nobody has that.
On Earth.
On Earth, right. And here was a device that in operation was doing this. To do that, Barry told me, he started the reactor. When it was operating, after a short time, he told me to put my hand or attempt to touch the sphere on the top of the reactor. And as my hand got close to it, you can feel a force exactly like putting 2 like poles of a magnet together.
Wow.
Kind of that soft
push.
Yeah, a soft push, but what you're experiencing now is more of an anti-gravity field, which is something entirely different.
Oh, no, that's extremely interesting, Bob, because as you may have seen, they've done experiments now in Sweden with incredible magnetic fields generated in a fairly conventional manner, and they have actually levitated frogs and plants and all kinds of strange little things. They've levitated with...
Is this documented?
Oh, absolutely.
I haven't heard anything about it. With a magnetic field?
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Well, certainly frogs are not magnetic. I wonder what... is this just a raw magnetic field?
An
electromagnetic field?
An electromagnetic field, raw and gigantic, and they had a little chamber.
The big superconducting setup?
Yep. And
they're levitating a frog?
You got it. And the
Was
frog...
it written up anywhere?
Oh, absolutely.
Huh. I wonder how this managed to pass me by.
I'm glad to be delivering so much news to you tonight, Doug. but obviously...
Where can... do you have any...
Is it on your website?
Not to run off on another tangent here, but is there a name of any of the people or anything you can reference me to where I could look?
I'm sorry, this second I can't. It was Finnish scientists. It was carried on NBC, ABC, CBS. All the networks had it. They had the photographs of the frog floating there.
Boy, that's a tremendous discovery there.
Well, it is. It just, when you mentioned to me the tremendous gravitational field and the effect on your biological hand, it immediately flashed to that experiment in Finland. So there you are. Anyway, so you pushed on
one more question. Have they levitated anything non-conductive, something with no water in it, like just I don't know, what
Well, they levitated...
plastic or something like that?
No, I don't think so. I think that it was plants, nuts, frogs, spiders.
So it was all biological material?
Yes. Yes, but you said yourself you felt the gravity with your hand. Now, that's the biological effect.
Right.
Anyway, I don't want to stunt your story. I just couldn't resist telling you that.
No, I'm glad you brought it up. That's actually very, very interesting to me. As time went on, we tossed a little golf ball at it, too. And it never did hit the sphere. It merely ricocheted off the field, which, again, was an impressive display.
Indeed. A golf ball is not in any way conductive. It has no moisture. It has no...
Well, or minimal amounts.
So minimal.
Aside from the fluid
Sure.
center golf balls.
Oh, that's right. They are fluid centers, aren't they?
But in either case, this was quite a impressive demonstration, just in the fact that this is producing a omnidirectional gravitational field around the unit. It was later connected up to the emitter and the amplifier, and where the gravitational beam out of the emitter can be focused. This, again, was extremely impressive. The gravitational wave or waves coming out of the emitter were focused into a small point and produced a little black dot in the air, hovering in the air.
Really?
Now, this is not to say it was a black hole, but what it was showing me was that it could bend light. Now, the only thing that can bend light is gravity. It's
that's right.
A lot of people say, well, light can be bent, so on and so forth. Usually that's diffracted or refracted, but where you can only bend light is with gravitational waves. So to me, again, this was another impressive demonstration.
But it really was a kind of a black hole.
Well...
In the sense that it was absorbing, at least in that
Well, a black hole, by definition itself, would be the source of the gravitational distortion, as opposed to, this
the byproduct
focusing on it. And, you're also, a black hole, a quantum singularity, and blah, 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 blah,
Sure,
blah.
but the theory is the same, isn't it? In other words, you saw the blackness because of the intense focus of...
Right, where light couldn't escape.
Yeah.
Yeah, essentially true. Still, it was an extremely impressive demonstration to me.
Oh, yes.
So... basically, those were we did get to essentially fool around with it a little more, but he was updating me with basically what had been learned in the time that they had the craft there. He wasn't really specific on how long the craft was there. He was very elusive on many of the questions that I presented to him. How many
did you? Yeah, that's something I want to touch on. You must have had 1 million questions by then.
I did, and he would answer them peripherally. He wouldn't really get down to the meat of the question. Mm. Yeah, who knows if he was told to do that or that was his own decision or what. But again, he was just basically filling me in with what they knew and what my job was going to be. And this was it. This was finding out how this subsystem of the craft operated in the craft, operated outside of the craft. Could this eventually be duplicated using another power source? Could this power source be duplicated itself without using exotic materials, and so on and so forth? Sometime later, I got my only view inside the craft, which again was extremely exciting.
Yeah, no kidding. Now, can you describe what you saw in that craft?
Yeah, I was let in again by what's his name? Not Barry, Dennis. And we walked up a small roll-away stairway that led into the craft. It was very cramped getting in the doorway. The hatch was removed. I really didn't pay attention to see how it was fashioned to it or if there were hinges or anything. A lot of people have asked me that, but it was, you don't spend time looking at how a door was connected somewhere when there's a flying saucer in front of you. In either case, I went inside. Initially, you must bend over to get in. There is very little headroom.
So whoever originally flew in this was small.
As you walk into the craft, first of all, I should address a few questions that people constantly ask me.
All right, please.
One of them is certainly, well, how did you feel going into the craft? Wasn't it the most exciting thing in your life? And I know I've said this 1,000 times before to many other people, but it was not, the feeling at that time was not of excitement. It was a very ominous feeling.
Ominous.
Very much so. It was more a feeling like, it's actually, I really can't describe it. It's difficult to put into words, but it was a very ominous feeling, more like, are you sure we should be here? But, of course, after the fact, it was certainly exciting, but it was a very, very odd feeling because, and with no pun intended, it was a very unearthly setting inside.
All right, that's a perfect place to hook them. About being inside that craft, what do people generally ask, and how do you respond?
Well, first of all, is the overall description inside. Entering the craft is, like I said, certainly uncomfortable for an adult human being.
You realize that you're not in a place that was designed for humans.
Exactly. And it certainly is different from anything that you're familiar with. And what I mean to say about that is everything is basically one color. Normally, any area you're surrounded in is always different textures, different colors, so on and so forth. The inside of the craft is essentially all a dull pewter aluminum color, very metallic looking. Mm-hmm. There are no sharp right angles anywhere, and the description I've given before is basically the craft looks like it was just injection molded, essentially like the model was. There are no seams anywhere. Everything inside the craft looks like it was fashioned out of wax, heated for a short time, and then cooled to where everything basically melted into what was next to it, what it was sitting on. That's about the best description I can give as to how the inside looked.
Seamless.
Seamless and very unusual. Again, no right angles anywhere. the structure of the craft, the skin from the outside was smooth. Inside, this is very difficult to describe, but if you can picture yourself inside a disc of a flying saucer shape, and you're inside looking at the wall surrounding you, there was an additional structure, kind of a secondary wall. It was kind of repetitive archways that looks like it was either for structural integrity or, as we later found out, something to do with the waveguide and the gravity amplifiers themselves. But if you have the box there you're looking at, you notice what I'm saying is kind of difficult. There's a little booklet that came in there that has a nice cutaway view of the craft, but it's very difficult to describe without drawing a picture or seeing something visual.
Well, the lucky people on the internet can see what I'm holding up. The others are going to have to make do with your word pictures, or go out and get a copy of the tester model. Or how else might people see? Is there something on your, well, again, it would be your website, so it's just people with computers. So we've got to formulate word pictures for people without.
Yeah, I'm not really good at that, but that's basically what there are 3 levels to the craft. When you enter into the main level, and that's basically what you see. As far as what's on the main level, well, first of all, the dimension of the craft is about 52 feet in diameter, about 16 feet high. That's just the overall measurement. Now, back on the inside of the craft, what you'll see in the center of the craft is the reactor itself. Extending from the reactor up through the top of the craft is the waveguide. It kind of looks like a little chimney, more or less. Surrounding the reactor in the center of the craft are 3 seats. These seats all face one direction. Also near these 3 seats are the 3 gravity amplifiers themselves. They look like consoles, just solid rectangular objects. When I say consoles, I don't mean there's any buttons, lights, or anything of that sort. And in fact, there were no buttons, lights, switches, or wiring in the entire craft.
Really?
Really. That's also quite an impressive feat.
No levers, no buttons, no lights, no switches.
However, I did not get to go in one part of the craft, so I really can't say what was there. But I do have a good idea as to what was. Now, this was all on the center level. Immediately underneath, there's a small breakaway part of the floor as you walk in to the craft over to the left. It's a collapsible hexagonal, very unique doorway. People have asked me, have you ever seen anything in any of these crafts, any of the technology that could be used today, something simple? And that's certainly one of them. Aside from the high-tech gravitational propulsion system, so on and so forth, something very, very simple to understand and easy. And anyone that's taken a 6-pack of beer or bottles or anything like that, you'll notice that if you push on the sides of you take all the bottles out, you push on the sides of the box, it all collapses flat.
Yes.
And the floor itself was hexagonal in shape and made of little square hexagons like that, of thin metal, with a little notch cut out. So basically, to operate it, you just stuck your hand in the notch and pushed, and the entire thing collapsed flat and left a hole open. However, when it's, I'm getting tangled with my words here, because there's so many other things going through my mind. When it's extended and the opening is closed off, it's a very strong structure, because you're standing on the top of hexagons. The metal is relatively thick, even though you kind of have an idea of what I'm trying to present here?
I
A
absolutely
visual?
do. Of course, I understand how it derives the strength, yes.
So yes, it's very easy to collapse one way, but that's one simple thing I thought would find uses somewhere, somehow, something that could be made right now. In fact, I've fashioned one out of thin metal. I have absolutely no use for it, but it's just one of those strange things. I've never seen anything like it, and it's certainly something that could be, I don't know, used in some sort of architecture somewhere.
Now, the craft you were in had all of its, the generator, the amplifier.
Right, this was all on the first level.
Everything was intact.
Absolutely.
All right.
Well, let me take that back. One of the amplifiers was removed.
All right.
On this craft. When you do collapse this little porthole, you can fit your body through at least the upper part of it and look underneath. This is the lower level of the craft. This is where the emitters, what I sometimes call the gravity amplifiers, hang down. These are three of the cylindrical-shaped black objects, 2 foot in diameter, 4 feet long, that actually emit gravitational waves from them.
Like a microwave horn.
Right. They are positioned directly underneath the larger rectangular gravity amplifiers on the first level and are, in fact, connected to them. The actual physical connection between the emitters and the subflooring above it, again, is something very interesting. It's a short piece of pipe, I'd say, maybe 12 inches longer, maybe slightly, 12 inches long, maybe a little longer than that. But this mounting flexes in any direction, but it's a solid piece of pipe. It's something very, very unusual, and we see the same thing being used on the waveguide to the reactor. From what we could see, by applying an electric charge to different parts of this structure, it would bend quite easily.
Really?
Yeah, it's again something very difficult to describe without drawing it exactly how this operated. But it was not made of in a telescopic form where you'd see something like a car antenna where it would collapse down on each section would collapse down onto one another. It was a solid piece, if you can imagine just a solid piece of pipe, and applying an electric charge to it and having the pipe bend but remain rigid after it had done so. Anyway, this compromised composed the focusing system for these three amplifiers. They received signals from other parts of the craft. The amplifiers would focus in on a certain point, and this is basically how the amplifiers were aimed. And the craft had, again, it's kind of a lengthy explanation, but there were two different modes the craft we found would operate in. One is called Omicron, and one is called Delta. The Omicron configuration was the standard operating mode of the craft, and it's where it used one single amplifier to maintain its elevation in the sky. One of the other amplifiers was rotated 90 degrees and essentially pointed straight out ahead of the craft. So with one amplifier working, it essentially produced an anti-gravitational pillar to stand on. With the amplifier that was rotated 90 degrees, instead of what we would normally think along the lines of propulsion, where a jet would essentially exhaust material, hot gases out the back,
right?
Where we would normally think along the lines of a propulsive force, what the craft did was essentially create a distortion in front of it.
A distortion. Now,
a gravitational distortion.
Is that like sort of creating a well, in effect?
Exactly. It would create a little distortion, a divot in time-space, if you want to call it that. A well is a good analogy, too. to where the craft would actually, this is kind of the low performance mode, if you want to give it a name, but where the craft would actually continuously slide downhill.
Yes.
A very awkward, strange mode of propulsion. I mean, we have nothing that would even really relate to something like that. But it's kind of backwards, if you see what I'm saying.
I do.
The other mode of propulsion...
And you, before we go to that, you would imagine this mode of propulsion to be used in what configuration? In other words, in an atmosphere, for example?
In an atmosphere, just maneuvering around small objects.
Source of gravity, probably near a planet or moon, would you say?
I would imagine so, yeah. I don't think it would be used in space. There would be some, by definition of this mode, it requires some force, some large amount of gravity to be acting on the craft. So you would have to be near some sort of gravitational body. So
all right.
I would imagine as it was hovering around the ground, this is what would it.
All right, makes sense. And then there was another mode.
The other mode is the delta configuration, and this is how it normally travels through space and makes large jumps. The craft flies with the belly facing the direction you want to go, not as you would normally see the craft in a science fiction movie.
Ah.
The gravity amplifiers are all brought up to power, and they're focused on a single point. This point now becomes an area of intense gravitational distortion, many, many times more than what we were talking about before. And this is where the true warp drive comes into effect. This is where you actually bend, you begin to distort space and time. And instead of the craft actually flying, you're basically distorting the fabric of space around the craft and move without actually traveling. You're not moving in a way.
So if I'm visualizing this correctly, it's kind of like the other mode, except far more intense, and you're constantly moving toward this warp, or with this warp. I don't know which way to think about it.
Well, you actually become part of the other space. It's a pretty wild concept, but something that it really isn't unknown to us. As I've stated before, to most people this sounds like wild science fiction. However, we know most of these things are possible. We know, for example, as I stated in that tape, that we can see stars that are behind the sun. And the reason for that is the intense gravitational field of the sun bends not just light, but it bends space around the sun, and we can see some things behind it. We know that we know space, gravity, and time are all interrelated. We know this for a fact. We know that around areas of intense gravitational fields, time essentially slows down. I mean, it's certainly been theorized that if one was to orbit a black hole, an area of tremendous gravitational distortion of gravity will, for instance, that time would virtually stop.
Right.
So with all these things interacting, this is how you can travel a great distance with essentially no time elapsing. First of all, you're bending space towards you. By doing that, you're actually slowing time. Not to say that this is a time machine, it's just a byproduct. Whenever you produce a gravitational field, whenever you're around an intense gravitational field, time slows. It's just
Bob, did you discern all of this yourself after long examination? Oh, no, this was...
Absolutely not.
Okay, they gave you this then.
Right. Mm-hmm.
All right, and so, God, you've got... so then you're in the craft. Then your job, I guess, is to go back to the gravity amplifier and the rest of it. They've already got disassembled, and try and back engineer the thing or try to make it work with materials that we have here on Earth. Is that correct?
Basically so. Well, basically is to start at the very beginning and look at the reactor and try and see how from ground level the device operates. And this is where apparently I came in to the project.
All right. Let's see, Bob. In the interest of time, because we could spend 10 hours with this. perhaps not before you fell asleep, but...
Well, we did make some coffee here. I detected I started rambling and not saying anything, so hopefully this will help. We are about 3 hours past my bedtime.
I see. I appreciate it. The nation appreciates it. This really is an incredible story. Now, briefly, you went to work, obviously, trying to back-engineer this.
Right.
How far did you get and what did you learn?
Well, not very, and I need to digress for a moment here, and this is where I learned one of the reasons why I was hired. Initially, our work started on the reactor. We figured that's the center point of everything, and this is where we should really concentrate our efforts, and apparently that's what the people before me did, too. Apparently, there was an attempt to analyze the operation of one of these reactors, and I got to read the notes that the gentleman before me had left. There was a fatality, or actually 3 fatalities, if I remember, when they attempted to do this. For some reason, they attempted to get into the reactor while it was in operation under load, and it was never very clear in their notes as to why anyone decided to do that. However, again, in the interest of time, I'll cut this short, but they did attempt to do that. The reactor did explode, and the gentlemen were killed. I was to replace one of these people.
Great.
So this is...
Did anybody at any point suggest that you go in?
Oh, no. I think this is something... I think they reached a point of frustration, couldn't get anywhere, and, went on from there. Again, this didn't sound very sensible to me, but this was a story that was relayed to me.
All right, go right ahead.
We then found, again, we had identified
an element,
a super heavy element, one that doesn't naturally occur on Earth, and certainly one that we haven't synthesized. This element was identified as 115. Now, normally, the higher level elements, the ones that we have produced in accelerators, decay in a fairly short time. In this case, what we were seeing was a stable element, one that was not undergoing any radioactive decay, which is very unusual. However, again, this is something that science and chemists have already theorized, that there should be an island, essentially an island of stability for elements around the 114, 115, 116 area. However, we certainly haven't been able to produce anything that high up on the periodic chart, but apparently, this is what we were observing.
How much of this element 115 was available? 200.
Well, there were 223 grams in the craft, in the reactor.
223 grams. I heard a story, I think it may have been from John Lear, that, and this jumps us way ahead, but that you somehow got some of element 115 out of that area. Is that true?
I really don't want to comment on that.
All right, I didn't think so. John didn't want to say much about it either, but that was rumor. We'll let it stand as a rumor. All right, so element 115, something that we don't have yet. I think we have progressed a little bit up the scale, but we're certainly not at 115. Where are we now? What is our?
I believe the last isolated was 112.
112.
And
yep.
Most of the more recent work has been done in Darmstadt, Germany.
All right.
In fact, I believe there's their plan to produce element 116 is coming up next. I think they plan on. I think it was californium and calcium or something. Do you remember that, Gene?
Yes, I think they were going to fuse curium with calcium, and they were going to end up with element 116, which they then thought would decay in a chain of unknown nuclides and see where the island of stability actually settled.
But they are very close to a attempting to pierce that island of stability and seeing what's going to happen. However, producing one or two atoms of it really isn't going to let them determine how the substance is going to react, but at least they're there. They're almost to the point now where they can begin to look at some of these exotic substances.
Right. There are a lot of people waiting to see if they can perform any experiments or find this, gravity A that Bob alludes to. But really, when you read, and I'm certainly a lay person, when you read on these, for instance, the website for the Lab for Heavy Ion Research in Darmstadt, Germany, you can see that they actually detect these atoms when they make them, and getting an atom or two, it doesn't put them anywhere near having a quantity of it that you could hold in your hand and actually study for any macro scale type effect.
You bet. Bob, how long were you then at S4 doing your work?
It was from December of 88 to April of 89.
December of 88 to April of 89. Okay. What went wrong? When did the whole thing begin to go to sour, and why?
Boy, there's a long story. Okay, the Reader's Digest, this story.
Reader's Digest version.
Yeah, a Reader's Digest version of this, which is typically longer than the entire story itself.
Do you want me to tell it?
If you got a shorter version than I do, well, go ahead.
All right, how about this? At what stage of work were you when it began to go bad?
Well, very early. Well, go ahead, Gene. Give it a try.
Well, Bob had been on an on-call basis, and right when he got to the point where he's told you about up to this point, they stopped calling him into work. And this was very frustrating. He wasn't a fun guy to be around. And what had happened is when he, as he told you before, he had to sign documents allowing them to monitor his phone and fax and computer and anything that came into his house over a phone line. And to make a long, sad story short, Bob's wife was having an affair, and they found out. And when they gave him his security clearance, they deemed him to be financially stable, emotionally stable, and just generally stable. And so now they knew that he was going to be having some emotional problems, and they stopped calling him. Ultimately, they heard his wife admit that she had had an affair to her mother over the phone, and she ultimately told Bob. And they called him in and yanked his security clearance, saying that they deemed him to be a sure candidate for emotional instability, and that he could reapply again in 6 to 9 months. So I
have never heard any of this before.
You've never heard this?
No.
Yeah, that's the reason that he lost his clearance. It had nothing to do with him.
All right. Well, you had signed all these papers, Bob. What motivated you to go public? I mean, that's weird in itself. I mean, why did you go public? Surely you had to worry about your life, you had to worry about your career, and I don't know whether everybody knows, but you were virtually, the modern term is erased. Your educational records were erased. A lot of the work you did in New Mexico was erased, save for one little mistake. I think your name was, and still is, recorded in a phone book, isn't it?
Right. For the most part, everything was.
What was it they missed? Where was that? A phone book where?
That was, it was an old phone book in Los Alamos.
Los Alamos.
However, certainly they couldn't erase the, as I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, the newspaper article at that time clearly stated on the front page of the local Los Alamos newspaper that I was a physicist working in Los Alamos Labs.
Yes.
So, they certainly couldn't go back and make that disappear. But
they made a lot disappear, didn't they?
Yeah.
However, Art, they did lie to begin with. As you know, George Knapp, for your listeners, is at that point in time was a news anchor for the CBS affiliate here in Las Vegas.
Channel 8.
Yes, and he had extensive correspondence with Los Alamos as well as Kirk Meyer, which was one of the subcontractors that Bob worked for. and they all denied. Kirk Meyer did say he was issued a Z number, which was a number required to be an employee and to get a paycheck, but none of them had said that they retained records that far back. And at this point in time, it was only, 5 or 6 years earlier. It wasn't, 10 years like it is now. And that they didn't retain any records at all. And George gave them numerous chances. He said, "Are you sure you have no record of Bob Lazar?" He asked Kirk Meyer, "Are you sure you have no record of Bob Lazar?" Mm-hmm. They denied. And then that's when Bob came up with the Los Alamos phone book with his name and station number in there, and then also he had a copy of the Los Alamos newspaper from 1982.
And how did they react to that?
Well, we're also talking about two people. When I was initially hired on, I was hired on via a headhunter, essentially, for Los Alamos.
Sure.
And I worked, like I said, the initial time you work for anyone in a secure job, you have that time before your clearance goes through, and that's when I worked for Kirk Meyer. And then later became hired on directly at Los Alamos. However, both people, either quote-unquote lost their records or just flatly denied the existence of me even working there.
Well, what pushed you to go public?
What pushed me to go public essentially was fear.
Fear of what? Fear of death, fear of prosecution, fear of
Well, just fear in general. I imagine you can add them all together, and that was essentially what I was feeling at the time. At that time, I had nothing other than what I had said to anybody. For the most part, if I suddenly disappeared off the face of the earth,
nobody would have noticed.
Well, not only would nobody would have noticed, I certainly have friends and family that would miss me, but no one would have known exactly what happened. And
people disappear all the time.
Right.
Well, especially in Las Vegas. So I at least wanted to get what was going on out in the open. And I believe it worked very well. It was essentially a pushback against all the force that was leaning on me. Where if I thought if I just went on in a subdued fashion on television and maybe just said a little bit and just kind of gave a little shove back, they would lay off. And it was a big gamble, but it worked exactly the way I wanted it to.
Also, Art, at this point when he was trying to show those around him what was going on is when he took people like me and his wife and John Lear out to the BLM land outside of Area 51, and we actually saw one of the discs tested in the sky. Now, Bob did this after he told us the story. After he was in trouble and in fear for his life, he told those around him the story, and obviously we were a little apprehensive when a friend said, we thought he was just working in some project for the government. None of us really cared what he was doing. And, so he wanted to prove that, not that we thought he was lying, but it's still an outrageous story to tell your wife and friends and say, oh, by the way, I'm working on flying saucers.
Sure, and John has told me the story of the trip up to Area 51, and there is video to support your claim as well.
Right.
Plenty of video. Now, they didn't let you go, though, because in 1990, and a lot of people use this, Bob, to try to discredit you, you had to plead guilty to a pandering charge related to the apparent operation of an illegal brothel in Las Vegas.
Mm-hmm.
Now, a pandering charge, that's very serious.
Actually, I got to pick the charge.
Oh, you got to pick it?
Yeah, I got to pick the charge from three of them.
Now, my understanding is a little vague, but I think all you did was some computer work, isn't that right?
Well, what I literally did, we have to, backtrack to years ago. After I left Los Alamos and opened up 1 hour photo business for my wife in Los Alamos, we had decided to move. And we began, because of our contract with Los Alamos, began to amass quite a bit of money. We were looking for a business to buy into. One of the things we invested in was one of the legal brothels in northern Nevada. a very
in
weird...
northern Nevada? No kidding.
Right. Well, this was years ago.
Yeah, people need to know, here in my county of Nye, we have legal brothels, and near Reno they have legal brothels as well.
Right,
so.
which is up where this was.
Okay.
And it was just another business, just an investment opportunity. We had made money off of it and later got rid of it. However, an amazing coincidence, after all this had happened, after I left the lab and we decided to move to Nevada, which is essentially what brought me to Las Vegas here. I had businesses in Southern California, in Northern Nevada, and in New Mexico, and I needed a central hub, and that's the only reason I moved out to Las Vegas.
Sure.
So essentially you knew the brothel business at that point.
Well, yeah, to some extent. And even though we were out of it, after I had left S4 and began to look for some other source of income, I ran into one of the old managers of the place up north.
Right.
And she said she had a place running down here that wasn't running illegally, but she'd wondered if I could install a computer system like we had up there to make her business run smoother. And I said, there's no problem. It'll take me a while to write the program, and I can set the computers up for you, and so on and so forth. They also wanted a security camera outside to make sure a guy wasn't coming to the door with a gun or a knife. So
sure.
I essentially installed all that stuff and left, and that was that was the end of it. However,
only it wasn't the end of it.
No, it wasn't the end of it, and certainly it was pretty.
Back to Bob Lazar and Gene Huff. Bob, here's a really good question for you. I guess we ought to finish up. So you got arrested after being on television with George Knapp.
Well, not really arrested. They said just come down and talk to us.
I see. Well, a lot of people.
But even the judge thought it was very strange that the FBI was at the trial, and I think he made some very unusual comments too, knowing that there was some other influence.
Yeah.
Well, we can all turn our imaginations loose on that one.
Yeah.
It's not real.
And
hard.
actually, they gave him probation, and the people of the probation department used to fight to try and get to come do the checks on Bob so they could speak to Bob Lazar, the UFO guy.
All right, I want to run you through a few fast questions. I've got a million faxes. One is a good one. How could some of the UFOs or parts be disassembled if they, in essence, had no seams?
They were absolutely torn out of the craft. When I had corrected myself and said that one of the gravity amplifiers was removed from the sport model itself, it wasn't removed surgically like you would imagine. It looked like it was almost cut off with an oxyacetylene torch, though there were no burn marks on the deck. But it was absolutely ripped out. Now, I never did see where the other amplifier to that craft went, or heard any stories about it, but
maybe it was the one on the workbench.
All right, ripped out is the answer. All right, good answer. By the way, for your reference, Bob, the frog was levitated in the High Field Magnetic Laboratory in Amsterdam at 16 Tesla. If Bob would like to take a look at the photographs and read about it, I've got a web address here. The most complete account is given in, quote, of Flying Frogs and Levitrons by M.V. Berry and A.K. Geim, European Journal of Physics, version 18, page 307 to 313. That's just for your reference.
I'm really interested in that.
Have you ever, Bob, subjected yourself to regressive hypnosis in hopes of recalling details? Because obviously, even in this program, they're still coming back.
Yeah, I did. In fact, that was one of the first things we did, and it was not, again, so many offbeat stories get started on this information.
Sure.
People said I, was either drugged or hypnotized there at work and couldn't remember anything, or, however the stories go. But there are plenty of them, and they're more than a fair share on the internet. But I initially went to a hypnotist here in town by the name of Lane Keck, specifically one that had heard nothing about flying saucers, alien abductions, or any of the other silly things associated with this, and went specifically to remember intimate details of what I was working with, specifically layouts, schematics, so on and so forth, so I could sit there and, to the absolute best of my ability, draw and record everything that I had seen and done, and that did help out quite a bit. It seemed to,
All right. Well, these are random questions, Bob. Somebody asked if the anti-gravity field has to extend all the way to the ground in order for a saucer to fly, or if it has to simply surround the disk itself or the bottom of the disk.
No, it really just has to surround the disk itself. In fact, that's how when I was talking to that other gentleman in Australia,
yes.
That is essentially what we were talking about, that the field produced around the craft is like a torrid, a big donut, essentially. However, with the bottom extended is, the pedestal, the effect of the emitters pointing in that direction. But the field does completely surround the craft.
All right. Here's another one. Please ask Bob if the principles that you've been describing tonight have any relevance in what you've heard of stories with regard to the infamous Philadelphia experiment.
The Philadelphia experiment. A long time ago, when I was at I had heard of the Philadelphia experiment some time ago, and when I was in Los Alamos, they have a classified library there in the library. And I was able to find some general information on the Philadelphia experiment. And in my personal opinion here, that this is a story that has gotten so completely blown out of proportion.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly there were people injured and people killed in the this test. The aim of the project apparently, now maybe I was reading false material, but from what I understand, the aim of the project was to make this was the apparent first test of any stealth technology. It was to make an entire ship invisible to radar, not optically invisible.
Right, correct.
And to do this, they were essentially using huge microwave generators, which is essentially what radar is. And,
you bet.
I think the accident that occurred was more along the lines of radiation injuries and things along those lines, not the more sensationalized, we flipped into another dimension.
Continuum,
and
people coming up in the middle of the metal and all.
Yeah, I think there was a much more prosaic explanation for what happened, and in my opinion, and from the small amount of information that I was able to get my hands on, because that had always fascinated me too, as to what happened with that. But I think that's all we're looking at is just an accident along those lines, and the reason for the cover-up, I think, is the same reason for the cover-ups we see around Area 51.
Sure.
Is more of a legal reason because of the injuries involved, just like the toxic waste problem.
You bet.
Out there, than there being something unbelievably top secret.
All right.
Al Bielek won't like that answer.
I know, but that's all right. Art, I'm a computer tech. My training includes understanding electronics, of course. Please ask Bob if he would give us some figures on the toroid that he worked with, perhaps voltages and current. I like to tinker.
The toroid.
Toroid, yeah.
Oh, a toroid is a shape.
Well, you were just, that's just the shape of the field. You didn't even work with the toroid, did you?
No, I mean, that's just the shape. I don't understand the question, I guess.
All right, I don't either, so I give up. Have you been approached or have you agreed to be part of the CSETI program to get a congressional investigation going on all of this? Have you been approached by them?
No, not that I know of or remember.
All right. Please ask Bob. There is a gravity theory out there that says that gravity is RF waves from 1 hertz to past light. Basically, energy doesn't get destroyed, so it must all be out there, billions of waves. The Earth is an RF absorber, so on one side you are pushed to the Earth by the pressure of these RF waves. Do you think the engine you were working with was simply a wideband RF amp, then taking the signal 180 degrees out of phase, canceling any waves coming in, thus making anti-gravity?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I kind of see what he's leaning to. He's relating the gravitational waves to RF waves, and in fact, in some respects, there are some similarities here and there, but it isn't just plain RF.
Okay. A cavity resonator normally bounded by conducting surfaces in which electromagnetic energy may be stored or transmitted as oscillations whose frequency is determined by the size, shape, makeup of the cavity. Do these propulsion systems use this technology in scalar form, waveguide,
continue.
Waveguide form, or modulated FM form against or with gravity?
In waveguide form with gravity, essentially is gravity. This is along the lines of what I was saying, that this behaves very similar to a microwave system. And, we're seeing really a lot of similarities in the construction of the two, the comparison between the reactor waveguides and emitters and microwave systems themselves.
All right. What does Mr. Lazar think of Dr. Michael Wolff? He has in the past supported Mr. Lazar's claims about S4 and the sports model.
You remember?
Just refresh me on...
he's the gentleman from back east, I think in Connecticut or somewhere like that, who says... in fact, I think I read that he said that he was actually a medical doctor working out at S4. Isn't that right, Art?
I vaguely recall that.
Something like that, and essentially concurs with a lot of the things you have to say. But I don't think Bob has ever spoken to him or talked to him, or...
I really don't. I really don't remember his entire story, so I can't really.
And he wrote a book, but we didn't get it.
All right. Lee in Grand Junction, Colorado asks, Bob was being interviewed on a program several years ago where he described seeing a black and white photograph of an alien which had an autopsy performed on it. He said at the time all you could see was one large organ in the chest cavity. If he has seen the video, Alien Autopsy, please ask him if that's what he saw or how the two compare.
No, that isn't what I saw. I don't believe that video is authentic. I believe that's completely fabricated. In one of the briefings I had mentioned, there were two autopsy photographs of the apparent occupants of the craft. They were both cut. One was cut in a T fashion. It was a bust shot, essentially, from the middle of the chest upward. Mm-hmm. The chest was cut in a T fashion. The skin was pulled back, and apparently what was removed from the body was a single large organ, and I said that it most closely resembles a liver. Now, we're dealing with a black and white photograph, so I don't know what color it would be, but it has that almost semi-fluid appearance. There is the other portions of the other photograph had that organ cut itself, and it appeared to have many other chambers, and just from the small amount of information they provided, it seemed to have the function of several organs that we would be familiar with, but essentially evolved or grown together, however you want to look at it.
Wow.
But essentially just one large organ performing the functions of many organs that we're familiar with.
So all you saw, to be clear, were those photographs. You never saw any sort of alien being alive or dead in person?
No, not that.
No.
You know, again, this story always gets bent out of shape, too.
Well, Bob, this is why I didn't mention Dr. Michael Wolff. Dr. Michael Wolff says, well, you tell the story about walking down the hall. Wolff says he's one of the guys that was standing in that room. That's what he said.
All right. Okay, I will tell the story. Right. Do I think I saw a live alien? No. Am I even sure that those photographs were of an actual alien? No. How could I be? what we're referring to here, Art, is at one time I believe I was walking away from the hangar portion of the installation, and down this hallway that connected all the other rooms, on a door to my left, there are these 9 or 10-inch square windows on them that have the wires running through them, security windows, if you know what I'm talking about.
Sure.
As I was walking down there, I glanced quickly into the room, and what I saw in a quick glance was two other gentlemen in white lab coats,
yes,
facing my way. And then there was a smaller thing, okay, with its back towards the door, looking to them. And this was at a quick glance, and walked by, and immediately, everyone has jumped on it, saying, well, there was a live alien there, so on and so forth. Now, I find it much more plausible to believe that this was a dummy or something, them trying to ascertain the size of whatever creature flew in these crafts. Perhaps they were going to sit it in the seat, see where its arm placements, leg placements would be, so on and so forth. But I have, there's certainly no reason for me to believe that was an actual alien living.
Or that it wasn't.
Well, or that it wasn't. However, you would think that, quite possibly Barry would have said something about that, or I would have been notified.
You're passing the alien room?
Well, or it's something along those lines. I don't think that would have been left out. And, quite frankly, if there were living aliens there, would we be doing a back engineering program like we were? Wouldn't we be receiving some instruction as to how these devices operated? So it's
unless they weren't the aliens that knew that.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I don't believe that was. I believe they had a little dummy there because they were sitting there looking at it like they were trying to size it up as to, is this thing the right size, or so on and so forth.
Anyway, Dr. Michael Wolf alleges that he was one of the men in the white lab coats.
All right.
That's where he fits in that story.
All right. We're going to break here at the bottom of the hour. We'll be right back. Back to Bob Lazar and Gene Huff. Bob, I'm curious. I'm told that you're not going to do many interviews, or perhaps not any, after this one. What's going on?
Well, what happened is actually, believe it or not, someone's trying to call, yeah. Gene actually knows more about this than I do.
Well, when they optioned my screenplay, Art, they, Bob's story has been owned by 2 separate movie studios who, for whatever unknown reason, have not allowed the movie to make it to the screen.
Well, that was basically because of me, because they kept turning down their screenplay.
Yeah, Bob, he gives them freedom in a straitjacket. I mean, he won't allow them to do all the outrageous things they need to do, and so there was long bargaining. This studio wants to get the movie on the screen, and they want Bob to give them his attention, and they want him to be actively involved as a technical consultant on the movie. And Bob never does any interviews anyway, so it wasn't much of a demand. He never goes anywhere, so he agreed to it to give them the impact if they're going to spend tens of millions of dollars to get a realistic portrayal of his movie on the screen. They'd like him to wait and I guess do the rounds when the movie comes out.
So it's a rare opportunity. Yeah. I want to thank you both. All right, some very fast technical questions. If you don't know the answers, Bob, just say no. Are gravity waves a broadband or narrowband phenomena? Well,
they're actually a narrowband phenomena, but they're not just a simple electromagnetic wave. It seems to be a complex emission, and that's about all I can say in a short time about them.
All right. What is their frequency or wavelength, or was there a way of measuring that?
Well, there was. It's not really a set, as I said, frequency or wavelength, but there was an apparent... I wish this person would stop trying to...
Yeah, indeed.
There was an apparent carrier wave, and that was, I believe, of extremely low frequency. Not to say that this is the gravitational wave, but it was in the area of 7.5 or 7.2. Do you remember what the exact number was, Gene?
Yeah, 7.46 hertz at a 1 micron bandwidth or something like that.
All right.
Yeah. At almost 3 o'clock in the morning, my IQ drops about 50 points.
Maybe together we could get one answer out of it.
Is gravity radiation coherent?
Yes, it is.
Can you draw a schematic or block diagram of the propulsion system? The answer to that has to be yes. You've done it.
Yes, absolutely.
What level of power is produced during travel? Kilowatts, megawatts, gigawatts, or measurements that we don't have to express?
No, it's gigawatts.
Gigawatts.
I mean, there's a huge, and that's the way the craft runs is the reactor actually operates at its full potential always. The way they, if you want to use the term throttle the power, is they change the phase of the amplifiers themselves, but the reactor is always outputting its maximum.
All right. So that answers my next one, which was what is the duty cycle, peak average power, and duration of output? So it's always at full output.
Right.
Is there?
However, I do have to say that when all three amplifiers are being used for the delta mode of travel, they do not operate continuously. In other words, if the craft was sitting here locally in our local system, you can't make a jump, or you can't distort space from here to 30 light years out. This has to be done in several consecutive jumps, and there is apparently a recycle time, on the system.
And they're pulsed, right?
Yeah, they're pulsed, and again, we're working against the 3 o'clock IQ drop here, but I'm trying to remember. We even calculated the recycle time on them because we wanted to find out what the actual travel time would be, and adding, I can't remember if it's microseconds or milliseconds, but what we'll do in the future is, should we ever get the guys to update our web page, is post some of this information, some more of the technical stuff
that'd be
for
great.
The people that are interested in it.
All right. Is there a relatively simple antenna detector that one might use with a receiver or spectrum analyzer to capture gravity waves?
No, absolutely not.
What EM effects are produced near an operating saucer?
Oh, dramatic ones. Anything you'd see around any sort of electromagnetic pulse, but you see a tremendous electromagnetic disturbance. Actually, you have an optical disturbance too, and one that is quite fascinating. If you are directly under the craft, you will only see the sky above it, and here again is what I was describing as the bending of light. This is also a potential fantastic camouflage. Should we be able to duplicate a system like this for military vehicles and what have you, because the way the gravitational field is formed around the craft, the light is bent around it too. So looking up directly at the craft, you wouldn't see the sky. To actually see it, you need to step back out of the field. Well, you're not really in the field, but if you kind of see what I mean there. There are from certain viewpoints, the craft is completely invisible.
All right. Do gravity waves intermodulate radio or light waves in any way?
Do they intermodulate radio or light waves in any way?
How would you know?
I guess you wouldn't.
Well, I'm trying to guess here how that might happen. Well, I imagine they would, because what you're doing is you're distorting. Well, is that true? I don't know for sure, so I guess I don't want to guess.
That's an answer.
Yeah. Here's one that I don't understand. You might. Referring to the candle experiment, does the flame continue to radiate heat as well as light when it's frozen? Why or why not?
This is something that still to this day makes absolutely no sense to me, and and I saw it. So this has aggravated me and probably will forever. One of the experiments they showed me, if you remember, I mentioned the producing a localized distortion, producing a black dot.
Yes.
What the other experiment Barry performed for me was putting a candle in that space. And what he did was, I really don't recall if he pulsed the emitter at a lower power, a higher power, or it was probably at a lower distortion. But the candle flame continued to emit light, but the flame stopped flickering, as if it was frozen in time.
Ooh, that's weird.
Now, I would believe me, this is quite beyond weird.
Were you close enough to feel heat?
No, and I don't think anyone was brave enough to stick their hand in that general area either. Who knows what it would be like? But the fact is, if there was a localized gravity distortion, obviously there was, and if there was a localized distortion in time, why is there light being emitted? I mean, there's nothing here that doesn't make any sense at all, and this has really driven me crazy. And I can't. So, yeah, is there heat emitted? Boy, I would really love to know myself.
Wouldn't it indicate that,
actually,
we don't know as much about photons as we thought we did?
Well, really, we don't know. And when it comes right down to it. But obviously, if we're seeing, photons emitted in our normal optical bandwidth, there's nothing to tell me that they wouldn't be in the infrared bandwidth, which is heat also. So my guess is that there would be heat, but I would certainly love to have that demonstrated to me again and really observe that.
You observed only one propulsion system, correct?
One propulsion system.
In other words, one type.
Right. Well, from what I understood, there was only one type.
All right. Do the saucers have a communication, or did they seem to have any sort of communication system that you could perceive?
No. Again, however, this brings up another point. When I did see one of the craft tests flown, there at one point I was permitted to be inside the hangar. The craft was taken outside. And it was a very unimpressive test. The craft just lifted off the ground and moved around slightly. However,
would have impressed me.
Well, as I said, that's as unimpressive as a flying saucer test could be. But I mean, as far as it zooming around and doing all kinds of exotic maneuvers, it didn't do that.
In your opinion, would humans survive in the zooming around mode in these craft?
Absolutely. But my point was that. The person was apparently in communication with someone in the craft. Now, from what I was able to see, and I believe I even asked the guy, that he was communicating with him on a normal VHF transmitter around the 200 megahertz bandwidth,
right.
And with the gravitational distortion around it. In fact, this even relates to another question someone else had asked. I would imagine, and with the EMP effects of the craft, I can't understand how they can receive that in the craft too. So there's an awful lot of questions that I would really like to know the answers to, and obviously people ask these questions too.
Sure, the 200 megahertz area would be military frequencies generally. Let's try a couple of questions from the audience. So little time. First time caller line, you're on the air with Bob Lazar and Gene Huff. Hello.
Hello.
Hi, where are you?
I'm calling from Bellingham, Washington.
Yes, sir.
And respects to you, Mr. Bell. Your program is excellent.
Thank you.
I have a question for Mr. Lazar.
Ask.
2 times in my life I have seen... Huh?
Before I fall asleep.
In any of this, did you ever see any sort of strange blue light?
Yes, around the, strange blue light wasn't that strange. When the craft began to lift off the ground, because of the high voltage present on the very bottom of the craft, there was a corona discharge, kind of a brush-like fuzzy blue glow around the bottom, which dissipated when the craft got up to about 30 feet or so, but that was the only, unique blue light.
Color effect that you saw, right. Mm-hmm. East of the Rockies, you're on the air with Bob Lazar and Gene Huff. Hello, where are you?
I'm in Oklahoma City.
All right, sir.
And I was listening to the program, and then you was talking about that model.
Yes.
And on that booklet said that when he was inside the craft and he powered it up, one of the panels become, invisible-like, and there was some kind of weird writing on it.
All right, transparent. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, that was I was going to touch on that when I had mentioned that all the seats were facing in one direction. Between each archway in the craft, there's obviously the skin of the craft. Mm-hmm. That one archway that the seats face is apparently unique. Now, I say apparently because the other archways may in fact do this, but I saw no evidence of that. But the one time when I went into the craft, there was another team working in there, and they energized that portion, that archway in the craft, where the skin of the craft became transparent. Now, that's not the most amazing thing. I mean, we have liquid crystals that do that too.
It's true.
In fact, I think the new Buick sunroofs do that. However, this is more metallic than crystalline, so this was certainly another, unique material that can be used as, obviously a transparent, translucent viewport, or some sort of video or whatever their output is, display panel.
All right.
Also, Bob, on what this gentleman was referring to, you said on the right side of the archway was a solid panel and some sort of unknown writing scrolled down that, right?
Right. Well, I related it to writing. It's just the closest thing I said it looked like was Korean.
Korean,
right? I mean, I'm not very familiar with writing. Do you know what Korean writing looks like? It's mostly lines and little.
Well, it's like Chinese.
Well, no, not really. Chinese kind of looks Chinese.
All right, I'll take a look at Korean writing.
But that's my closest analogy to it. I'm not saying that it represented it in any way.
I understand. West of the Rockies, you're on the air with Bob Lazar and Gene Huff. Hello.
Yeah, good morning. This is Alexander in Central California.
Yes, sir.
I was just curious whether you're able to identify the material that the emitters were hanging off of, as far as elemental sort of thing.
No, we never got to that. That was certainly further down the line, but it was identical, at least apparently to me, to be what the waveguide was also made of, that connected to the reactor. And in fact, removing the reactor, if you grab the waveguide and lift it up, it just collapses in on itself. I mean, there's no visible seams or anything. It just gets smaller. But there's really no way to describe it. We weren't able to perform any tests on it other than just standing there and looking at it in amazement.
All right, listen, I want to give, you guys have been so good, I want to give you an opportunity to plug something or another. You've got a tape, I know. Gene, how do people can you still get that tape or not?
Yeah, you can.
Well, actually, the reason that tape is in existence was so I didn't have to do any interviews. And I used to just give that out to people because I absolutely loathe doing interviews, but we found people were selling it and